Hello out there and welcome to Left Behind, the show for those on the left who don't feel like they belong anywhere at all. Body camera footage was released of a team of 7 police hunting a man down and shooting him in the street in broad daylight. They claim he had a gun, which they recovered. The gun, of course, a 9mm handgun, standard police issue. Nothing to see here, just another murder by pigs. In slightly lighter police news, the top brass, or command staff, of the Rochester Police have resigned due to public pressure following the murder of Daniel Prude. In another reality, not the one we're currently inhabiting, Joe Biden says the only person calling to defund the police is Donald Trump. Speaking of President Trump, he was once again nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by 2 Norwegian lawmakers. This isn't news. I don't know why we're talking about it, but there it is. The president also took time out of his busy schedule to tell us that his pal Kim Jong-un is in good health and that we should never underestimate him. Thanks, Mr. President. Good to see some relationships are still holding strong. While the president was checking in on South Korea's leader, Senate Democrats were blocking a GOP relief bill. The details of why don't really matter. The point is, you don't matter either. To celebrate Labor Day, let's look at jobless numbers, which rose from 19% in June to 50% in August, all while the $600 a week unemployment benefit expired in late July. Speaking of Labor Day, here's a graph shared by Twitter's favorite leftist punching bag, David Sirota, showing union membership and share of income going to the top 10% from 1917 to 2015. This one's a real bummer, folks. But don't worry your pretty little heads. Market researcher Jim Bianco tells us that the Fed is going to be there in case we call our bluff, and the market won't crash. In entertainment news, washed-up country music star Travis Tritt has taken to Twitter to clarify that the dishonest left have been sharing a doctored photo of him in makeup to make fun of Ted Cruz. Travis, no one cares. It's still hilarious. Susan Sarandon has taken to Twitter to let us know that while she's voting for Biden to fight fascism in an anything's better than Trump effort, she also immediately called out his organization for not doing nearly enough in the organizing department. And shortly thereafter, changes were in fact made. Incremental change, but change nonetheless. Further evidence that we're living in a bizarro universe, President Trump railed against the military-industrial complex and endless war profiteering. What the fuck? Speaking of profits, Elon Musk is making billions of dollars due to loopholes that are way too complicated for me to try and comprehend. Check out the post from Stultus Vox from September 7th for more info. Recode's Jason Del Rey reported that Amazon has added retired 4-star Army General and NSA head Keith Alexander to its board of directors. Alexa, should I be worried? One of the week's biggest stories out of the neoliberal media was about Bob Woodward's new book, Rage. No one was talking about the real issue except for Mr. David Sirota about Bob Woodward and his publishers deciding to sit on this information that could have potentially saved tens of thousands of lives. And why did they do that? To turn a profit. In more uplifting news, Karen Slayer and former Senator Nina Turner is talking about running for president in 2024. When asked about it, she simply answered, "I am." Something else happened. This was an anniversary. I can't remember. That's right, 19 years ago, 2 weeks worth of COVID deaths happened, and Paul Krugman is here to remind us that America was resilient, strong, and in no way attacked innocent Muslims in response to these attacks. And finally, our lead into our top story this week. California is fucking orange. It is a hellscape. It is a dystopia. But if you were to ask the neoliberals, all we have to do is vote out Donald Trump and everything will go back to normal. We can fix everything if we vote for Joe Biden. This brings us to our main story of the day, neoliberals and climate change. We could spend days talking about neoliberals and how they've always feigned environmentalism, but in reality, they're just selling to whoever's buying. To get your vote, they'll care. To get big money donors, they promise not to impose any regulations that could affect profits. This isn't some grand expose I'm doing here. This is just my thoughts on a few things. Don't look too deep into this, do your own research, but start here. Democrats are quick to tell you about all the good they've done for the environment, but let's really take a look at things. The party platform tells you, Democrats believe that climate change poses a real and urgent threat to our economy, our national security, and our children's health and futures, and that Americans deserve the jobs and security that come from becoming the clean energy superpower of the 21st century. Let's really take a look at that statement in detail. Democrats, the party that cares about you, believe that climate change poses a real and urgent threat. Now, that sounds all well and good because it does pose a real and urgent threat to ourselves, our earth, our resources, our survival. But notice how the Democrats chose to start with our economy and our national security. Then they dive into children's health and futures. That's how they pull you back and keep you from realizing that all they really care about are how we deserve the jobs that come from clean energy. Not that we deserve the clean energy, we deserve to work on it. That's all we are, folks. We're slave labor. In reality, Democrats don't give a fuck about climate change. They tell us that it's our individual responsibility to make a difference, whether it's recycling, the kind of car we drive, the equipment we buy to heat and cool our homes, etc. The Democrats have a million plans to chip away at the damage capitalism has caused, but do they do anything to the massive corporations doing the most damage in their quest for profits? Of course not. Can't rock that capitalist boat. They donate money. They get protections. We get told it's up to us to stop climate change, but we all know that's fucking nonsense. Listen, I'm not a democratic socialist. I'm not going to go on about taxes and regulations in a better society, leaning more towards an anarcho-communist society, in my opinion. This simply wouldn't be happening. Which brings us to our next segment, theory. Every week I'm going to discuss some theory I've been reading, dabbling, curious about, and tell you what I've learned and what I think, and hopefully we can share ideas in this community we're going to build. So I'm currently reading The Conquest of Bread by Pyotr Kropotkin. This is essentially the anarcho-communist manifesto I've learned pretty early on reading, but definitely by the end. Kropotkin makes compelling arguments for revolution before breaking down how it can go wrong and what can be done to avoid said wrongdoing. The book is broken up into 17 chapters, well-paced and leading to the conclusion in an organic fashion. Kropotkin wastes little time ramping up the energy and declaring how wonderful our lives could be unburdened by capitalism, wage labor, and ultimately left to our own devices. You could argue the ideology against any other and chase your tail without making any real change. Kropotkin is here to tell you how he sees it, why he sees it, and why he thinks it can work. It's ultimately up to the reader, listener, and what have you, to embrace this hopeful future or to belittle it with trivial whataboutisms. What if, instead, we saw people in the best possible light and gave everyone an opportunity to live a good life? I posit, as does Kropotkin to a lesser extent in this work, that people aren't inherently awful. We've built societies that embrace that evil, but that doesn't negate the good in our world that should be ready and willing to combat it with love, compassion, and community. Now, diving a little deeper into the book, one of the subjects early on that I found particularly fascinating, one of the chapters, was food. As a person raised in capitalist America, I know that we have overconsumed and killed biodiversity all over the planet. However, Kropotkin's argument that people have, quote, no limit put to what the cattle of each homestead may consume, nor to the number of beasts grazing upon the pastures, end quote. At first this seems wasteful, but think about why we need things like oversight on food production. It's because capitalism requires us to regulate the purposeful overproduction and consumption. If left to our own devices, our own rule, we would not do this to ourselves. It's not in our common interests. Without profit as incentive, these things will likely happen far less, if at all. This book also reminds me of a sad fact, that at one time, water was just available. I cannot remember a time in my life when there wasn't a water bill. Who the fuck are we paying for water? Why can corporations own water? Another quote that caught my attention was, there is not even a thought or an invention which is not common property, born of the past and present. Thousands of inventors, known and unknown, who have died in poverty, have cooperated in the invention of each of these machines which embody the genius of man. Followed by, quote, by what right, then, can anyone whatever appropriate the least morsel of this immense whole and say, this is mine, not yours? Think about that. We have all been building this world. Whether we like it or not, whether we're happy about what we're doing, we are all playing a part in building this society and developing and creating in this society. So why then are we claiming ownership over things that, as Kropotkin once again clearly said, by what right can anyone, whatever, appropriate the least morsel of this immense whole? You can't. Another quote that caught my eye in a similar vein about just human well-being. Quote, the right to well-being means the possibility of living like human beings and of bringing up children to be members of a society better than ours, whilst the right to work only means the right to be always a wage slave, a drudge, ruled over and exploited by the middle class of the future. The right to well-being is the social revolution. The right to work means nothing but the treadmill of commercialism. It is high time for the worker to assert his right to the common inheritance and to enter into possession. Beautiful. This is all ours. We are not wage slaves. No one owns us. No one owns anything. They cannot. When we let them, profit and profit margins become a factor in our day-to-day life, and we become wage slaves. We drudge. We are ruled over and exploited. So at this point, I will say that as I'm reading the book, I'm starting to feel a connection to this movement, to this idea. And then this quote really kind of caught me and got me rah-rahing, fist in the air. Anarchy leads to communism, and communism to anarchy, both alike being expressions of the predominant tendency in modern societies, the pursuit of equality. Take a minute there, folks. Really, think about how much closer this idea feels to equality and freedom than what we're currently living in. No masters, no workers, just people surviving. On rent, a very hot topic for any communists or socialists or democratic socialists or anarchists. On rent, quote, the abolition of rent is a recognized principle, sanctioned, so to speak, by popular assent. That to be housed rent-free is a right proclaimed aloud by the people. Fist in the air again, brother, I'm with you. On limiting the number of injustices in this new society. Because if you think about it, people are going to say, well, if there's nobody in charge, there won't be any police and no judges and lawyers, and how are we going to keep people safe? Quote, now all history, all the experience of the human race, and all social psychology unite in showing that the best and fairest way is to trust the decision to those whom it concerns most nearly. There is no reason for judges to be looking at our lives and making these important decisions about what's happening to us. There is no reason for a CEO to be making the decision about how much a worker in a town he's never been to gets paid in order to survive with his family and live the best possible life. He's not thinking about you. He's thinking about his profit margin. Speaking of work, on working hours and productivity, because people will always talk about, oh, what about lazy people? Quote, suppose that in this society all children learn to work with their hands as well as with their brains. Admit that all adults, save women, engaged in the education of their children, bind themselves to work 5 hours a day from the age of 20 or 22 to 45 or 50, and that they follow occupations they have chosen in any one branch of human work considered necessary. Such a society could in return guarantee well-being to all its members, that is to say, a more substantial well-being than that enjoyed today by the middle classes. And moreover, each worker belonging to this society would have at his disposal at least 5 hours a day, which he could devote to science, art, and individual needs, which do not come under any of the category of necessities, but will probably do so later on, when man's productivity will have augmented, and those objects will no longer appear luxurious or inaccessible. Now, there's an awful lot to unpack there, but this is all about service, but also growth as people and society. This is harmony. This is being allowed to choose how you're going to contribute to society rather than just being thrown into what's available in the job market. This is having an opportunity to spend more time with your family, more time with your friends, more time in your hobbies, your interests, your arts, your sciences. It's giving you more time to have a true what we call now in this current society work-life balance. It's harmony, folks, and it shouldn't be something that has to be worked on. It can occur naturally. On science and advancing society as a whole, quote, "It is true that a learned society, like the individual author, goes to a printing office where workmen are engaged to do the printing. Nowadays, those who belong to the learned societies despise manual labor, which indeed is carried under very bad conditions. But a community which would give a generous philosophic and scientific education to all its members would know how to organize manual labor in such a way that it would be the pride of humanity. Its learned societies would become associations of explorers, lovers of science, and workers, all knowing a manual trade and all interested in science. If, for example, the society is studying geology, all will contribute to the exploration of the Earth's strata. Each member will take his share in research, and 10,000 observers, where we have now only 100, will do more in a year than we can do in 20. And when their works are to be published, 10,000 men and women, skilled in different trades, will be ready to draw maps, engrave designs, compose, and print the books. With gladness will they give their leisure, in summer to exploration, in winter to indoor work. And when their works appear, they will find not only 100, but 10,000 readers interested in their common work." This goes into the argument of a society like this not encouraging exploration, not encouraging ingenuity. It doesn't make any sense. What about wage slavery and police state makes you feel inspired to do anything? If nothing else, this will allow people to be inspired to say, wow, everything is so amazing and I've got this time. What if I could make it a little more amazing? Speaking of which, leading into the art and community aspect, quote, "The town is a chance agglomeration of people who do not know one another, who have no common interest, save the enriching themselves at the expense of one another." Think about that. Think about what towns and communities have become these days. What if people knew each other? What if people had a vested interest in community because without each other, they don't survive? Instead of having a common enemy, what if we had a common good? Uh, this part this part caught me, y'all. I was not expecting a woman's freedom from domestic slavery, almost call it a semi feminist take from a man back in the 19th century in Russia. But here we go. Quote, "Servant or wife. Man always reckons on woman to do the housework. But woman, too, at last claims her share in the emancipation of humanity. She no longer wants to be the beast of burden of the house. She considers it sufficient work to give many years of her life to the rearing of her child. She no longer wants to be the cook, mender, sweeper of the house. And owing to American women, this was back when we were still looking progressive, taking the lead in obtaining their claims, there is a general complaint of the dearth of women who will condescend to domestic work in the United States. My lady prefers art, politics, literature, or the gaming tables. As to the work girls, they are few, those who consent to submit to apron slavery, and servants are only found with difficulty in the States. Consequently, the solution, a very simple one, is pointed out by life itself. Machinery undertakes three-quarters of the household cares. To emancipate women is not only to open the gates of the university, the law courts, or the parliaments for her, for the emancipated woman will always throw domestic toil onto another woman. To emancipate woman is to free her from the brutalizing toil of kitchen and washhouse. It is to organize your household in such a way as to enable her to rear her children, if she be so minded, while still retaining sufficient leisure to take her share of social life. How about that, folks? Did you hear that part? Enable her to rear her children if she be so minded. Women are not baby factories, but if they choose to have babies and rear those children and help advance them in their lives, let's give them an opportunity to not feel like slaves in doing so. On slavery and economic output, quote, "They fear that without compulsion the masses will not work. But during our own lifetime, have we not heard the same fears expressed twice by the anti-abolitionists in America before Negro emancipation, and by the Russian nobility before the liberation of the serfs? Without the whip, the Negro will not work, said the anti-abolitionists. Free from their master's supervision, the serfs will leave the fields uncultivated, said the Russian serf owners. It was the refrain of the French noblemen in 1789, the refrain of the Middle Ages, a refrain as old as the world, and we shall hear it every time there is a question of sweeping away an injustice. And each time actual facts give it the lie. The liberated peasant of 1792 plowed with a wild energy unknown to his ancestors. The emancipated Negro works more than his fathers, and the Russian peasant, after having honored the honeymoon of his emancipation by celebrating Fridays as well as Sunday, has taken up work as much eagerness as his liberation was the more complete. There where the soil is his, he works desperately. That is the exact word for it. The anti-abolitionist refrain can be of value to slave owners. As to the slaves themselves, they know what it is worth, as they know its motive. Some of the language there is dated. I apologize, but I'm just reading this quote for word as a quote, and I think it still stands true if we change some of the words. The point is there. People don't work harder because they have to. They're forced to. They are told to, but they will work harder if it's for themselves. This is individualism being used for good. I need to feed me and my family. That's my motivation to go to work. And I'll be able to. Think about it this way. You can say, oh, in capitalist society today, that's why we go to work. But we do it and we never really get that promised life we're told we're working towards. In an anarcho-communist society, that opportunity is there. It's not taken away by a small percentage of elites, of owners, of an oligarchy. It's just not so. Quote, wage work is serf work. It cannot, it must not produce all that it could produce, and it is high time to disbelieve the legend which represents wagedom as the best incentive to productive work. End quote. Once again, selling that point that wage labor, wagedom, serf work, it is not the most productive way to get people to work. Kropotkin then describes a lazy man in a factory being more productive in a field, tending to the land, watching the sun rise or set. This is a truly beautiful thought, and it helps me look at some of my own feelings of inadequacy from a different angle. The job I do today is not something I ever wanted to do. It's not something I'm interested in. It's not something I'm proud of. It's literally just a job that I do to pay the bills that I'm forced to pay in order to live. The idea that I would have an opportunity to make my choice, whether it's to work out in a field or to work at an office and write for people, or to record something like this that people could then listen to. Whatever it is, I could contribute and then receive what's owed of my contribution, as well as every man and woman and child deserves their share. Kropotkin and anarcho-communism, to sum things up, it's very much against the division of labor and stamping people with careers as prisons. It's very much against wagedom and serf work and owners and rulers and masters and slaves. This is an idea about equality. And I think no matter how I wrap this up, I'm not going to do it justice. So I'm simply going to say this. After reading this very short book, I am ready. I am ready to live in the anarcho-communist utopia Kropotkin posits in the conquest of bread. Starting next week, folks, I'm hoping to have an interview segment here, but we just couldn't get it together for episode 1. So that's it for us here at Left Behind. Please like, subscribe, retweet, share, however you view this. Make sure you share it with as many people as you think could benefit from it. Follow us at Left Out Show on Twitter or email us at leftoutshow@gmail.com. Take care, comrades. Stay strong.